we put a pot of water on the stove and turn the heat element up to 8, it doesn't, because of the heat capacity of water, it takes time to warm up. And if we suddenly say, oh, it's too hot, let's turn it down, well, it doesn't cool right away because of the thermal capacity, the thermal inertia of that. And it's the same in the climate system. With more than 70% of the world covered by oceans, it takes time for the world to warm up. And when we say it's now too warm, we can't cool those 5,000 deep ocean water in a few decades. Big problem. So why should I care? Well, I personally believe that, and I think we do, and most adults do, in their daily activity do, particularly if they have children, do care about the intergenerational equity. And I frankly think people should care about species extinction. We know we're on path to have the destruction of all the world's coral reefs this century, all of them gone. Probably nothing we can do about that. We're probably on the path towards 50% of the species in the world committed to extinction this century. And we're on the path for major upheaval to geopolitical instability associated with changing water availability. And all of this is entirely foreseeable. And I think can lead to unrest that I think will be quite devastating in the years ahead. Now the issue too with global warming is that it's not like we have to discover the solution. They're all there. We know what the solutions are. They fall into 3 categories: technological, behavioral, and market instruments. And the latter is critical, I would argue, for the first 2 to come to play. And I'll illustrate that with something that you'll be aware of called the tragedy of the commons. As we know, going back to good old days in the UK, you would have, and you still have today, pastures owned by the Crown, common land. Let's suppose I'm a farmer and I'm going to do a cost-benefit analysis as to whether I should put another of my cows on this common land owned by the Crown. We all own it. Well, obviously, if I put my cow on the land, I'm going to benefit 100% from that, because no one else is benefiting from my cow getting fat. I benefit from it. And any costs of overgrazing are distributed amongst all farmers. So each individual farmer doing individual cost-benefit analysis will always find that it's in their best interest to put another cow on the land. And there can only ever be one solution to that, and that is a collapse. Now, the analogy to the climate system is direct. If you or I do a cost-benefit analysis, is it every single person in every house, in every municipality, in every town, in every province, in every country, in the world's best interest to do nothing about this problem? Because any cost of action is borne by the individual, and any cost of inaction is distributed among 7 billion people in the next generation, kind of the mother of all tragedies of the commons. So how do we stop this? How do we stop the inevitable collapse, of which human history is littered of examples of civilizations that have ended up in this state? Well, we could have a very benevolent council here. And there's 3 things they could do. They could regulate the number of cows on the land, knowing full well that in fact the land can only support, say, 100 cows. That's one thing we could do. They could cap the number of cows and say, okay, we know this can have 100 cows on it, so we're going to only allow 100 cows. And we're going to let you farmers, we're going to auction off the rights to put a cow on the land. We might use the money to build a fence or something, or buy some fertilizer. We're going to let you buy and sell the permits, and let the market determine the price that it costs to put a cow on the land. We have cow certainty, but not price certainty in this case. Or we could put a head tax on the cow. And in this case, we could say, we're going to put, it costs you X amount of dollars to put your cow on this public land. We bring some money in, we raise the price or lower the price to control the number of cows. If it is infinitely costly to put a cow on, no one's going to do it. If it costs nothing, we're back at the original tragedy of the commons. So you get price certainty in the latter, but not cow certainty. So the analogy again is direct to the climate system. How do we deal with it? Well, we can regulate. Business sometimes get a little creepy with too much regulation, but there's a very important role for regulation. We can enter something called a cap and trade system. We can cap emissions and allow industry to trade amongst themselves, or we can do carbon tax. One of the 3. And I would argue that these 3 types of approaches, and regulation does put indirectly a price on carbon, are absolutely critical in order to essentially deal with the tragedy of the commons. And anyone who says that they aren't is not telling the truth. And any political party that's suggesting that, in fact, we have a plan to deal with it that does not involve pricing is simply not telling the truth. Because every economist worth their salt We'll argue about whether we should do craft and trade or head tax, but we'll not argue about a necessary condition to actually move forward with the technological and behavior solutions in pricing emissions. Look, we have had wireless technology since 1979 when I graduated from high school. There were no cell phones. First cell phones were big monster satellite phones. Magnum PI, my dating me, they don't mean, I'm sorry, not the same. But back in the day, the big massive satellite phones. Now everyone has a phone. In fact, I got two. And we do the cameras as well. Remarkable advance in technology. You get a laptop. So I'm dating myself again. My first computer, I don't count the Texas Instruments thing on the desk, but my first one is a PDP-8. You program with switches and paper tape. Then you had punch cards. Then we have the PDP-11, amazing machine. And now, essentially everyone has a laptop. In fact, I've got two. And that's happened since 1979. We put men on the moon. In fact, we could have put women on the moon, but they're too smart to do this. But we have put men on the moon. And the reason why we put men on the moon was because Kennedy stood up in 1961 at Rice University and said, we're going to do it. Why? Because it's hard. And he challenged the US scientific community to make it happen. And it did. He was arguing at the time that it would happen within the decade, and it happened well before that, as a direct consequence of leadership and the scientific community rising to accept the challenge and deliver. But now I challenge you to think about this. Think about a piece of technology that is essentially invariant in over 100 years, other than the internal combustion engine. Think about it. We're putting in gas that's causing explosion, making pistons go up and down to move something. I mean, it's so old technology. You've got to ask the question, why are we still using it? Is it because we put men on the moon, we've had laptops and wireless technology, or perhaps is it because when we introduce new technologies and vested interests are present, there's a resistance to movement forward? And I would suggest that that is in fact the answer. I would suggest that, in fact, there have been vested interests, and it's more difficult to introduce technology to displace entrenched technology. And a direct example of this is the cell phone again. My family, half my family is Greek, the other half is Ukrainian. If you had Greek villages, Ukrainian villages, Africa, Asia, villages did not have telephones in their homes. It was too expensive to bring the landlines to the various villages. Along came the cell phone, and the uptake of cell phone technology in these regions was much faster than here, because it was a new technology that didn't have to displace an existing one. So I'd argue on this issue, scientists have done their job. And now it's time for politicians to do theirs. And I would argue that they're not. And I would suggest that we have a choice. We can sit around and complain, and I've done my fair share of that over the years, or we can get engaged and try to make a difference. Now, when I ran finally with the BC Party, I said no 3 times. I would give a class at the University of Victoria called Climate and Society, and I'd always culminate the term with, this would be the very last slide I put up. And because everyone was going to know, what can I do about global warming? And I said, well, you can do 3 things. One, each one of you have a wallet. You can buy something and you're sending a signal to the market about what's important to you. You can vote, because we know that 70 to 80% of seniors vote, and we know that 30 to 40% of youth historically vote. When Trudeau inspired a bunch of people who now feel very betrayed by a couple of issues not being kept forward with that caused them to vote in the first place. And the third thing, of course, is education. Tell everyone you know through 1 and 2. There is the solution. Use your wallet, vote. Tell everyone to use their wallet and vote. Simplistic, but really, this is what we're dealing with. I could no longer sit around and fiddle around with the Navier-Stokes equations in my what-if private experiments, knowing that all the work we would do in my lab would all be framed in the context of the single most important metric, is climate sensitivity. It hasn't changed from an estimate of 1.5 to 4.5 degrees since 1979. And in 2021, the 6th IPCC assessment will appear. And I'm willing to bet anybody here today that the assessment will have climate sensitivity somewhere between 1.5 to 4.5 degrees. So I said yes to James Stirk, and I said yes on a points of principle. Running with the BC Green Party was not a pathway to power, let me tell you. There have been all these pundits out there maybe was the funnest thing I had a chance of winning, nor did I think I was going to win. But I ran on the point of principle, that I could not stand by watching the dismantling of the climate policies in British Columbia and working capital and brought forward by a premier who was essentially selling snake oil to British Columbians about the potential prosperity of liquefied natural gas. I got elected. I was lucky. And then again in 2017. And what happened in 2017 was remarkable. In 2017, we elected 3 PCB MLAs. We held the balance of power in minority government. And that gave me the opportunity to do what I got into politics first, to do in the first place. And that was the development of the climate plan of British Columbia that I'm very proud of. And it's called Clean BC. It's our economic agenda, our vision for British Columbia, focus on our strengths, focus on decarbonizing our energy systems, focusing on electrifying our natural resource sector. We've introduced the single strongest ZEV mandate in North America. In May alone, 15% of new vehicles in British Columbia, 15% were electric. Remarkable, given that our ZEV standard is we are expecting 10% by 2025. And we're seeing the uptake now, and this has given me hope. And I'll just leave it with saying that, you know, and I encourage others here, if you're interested, think about, man, it doesn't have to be any party. There's good people in all parties. But often governments don't know what they don't know. They really don't. They just have no idea what they don't know. And I can tell you, people are just making from meeting to meeting. There's no time to reflect and think. You don't have a coffee and a piece of paper on a Sunday morning, just working on some difficult equation. There's no time for that. And there's an absolutely critical role for physics and applied mathematics to play in government policy. And I say again, you are the masters of evidence-based decision making. Government is the master of decision-based evidence making. If you are able to actually influence by provision of evidence, it can actually have enormous influence. And more often than not, we have people in political sphere, because they're not having discussions framed in evidence, they're talking over each other. A beautiful example of that is going on in BC right as we speak. BC government has been claiming that BC Hydro paid too much for the power from the independent power contributions in this province. Ontario went through something similar. At the same time, the proponents of these projects argued that that was the cost for power at the time. And so there's this big argument raging today about independent power contracts that were issued 20 years ago or 10 years ago, of which the discussion is entirely irrelevant, because if we did a call for power today at 8 cents a kilowatt hour, industry would respond at a much cheaper amount. But because we're discussing about the past and not looking at the evidence today, we miss out on opportunities. Finally, I suggest that this is one of the things that I was guilty of as an academic, and I watch with interest now as I see academics do it, is that we have to remember as an academic community that government doesn't only listen to us, the scientific community, but there are multiple stakeholders. And academics sometimes think that they have the only answer. And I know that because I was like that. We're experts in this field, and therefore we must have the best understanding of any of your experts in this field. But the reality is there are other opinions on things that are not necessarily the field, but come to bear on that. And the final thing I would say is that when approaching government, offering solutions is absolutely critical. And I had a lab at the University of Victoria, we had 20 people in the lab, and I'd say the same thing to graduate students. Never, never criticize someone's work unless you're willing to say how you would make it better. Because criticism is so easy. I don't like what you did, so what would you do? But being constructive in your criticism is far more difficult. And that is what government is looking for, as they don't know what they don't know. They don't just run a bunch of criticism. They want to know what you would do instead. And more often than not, if you're providing backed up information that's well argued, that's considering other stakeholders, I find that government listens. And that has been the success of the Clean BC program that we've built. Finally, government cogs turn slowly. So while I don't have all the answers to the climate problem, I can say for sure that it is not this. And that I am hopeful that we will deal with this problem. And I'm beginning to see a change, particularly in the youth that I run into in my time, and I'm sure many of you as well. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
inspiring presentation here, and I'm sure there are questions or comments.
Dr. Weaver, thank you for a terrific presentation. I saw that you started off talking as a physicist or a scientist, and then you sort of transitioned over into a politician. I wonder if you can transition back now to a scientist and talk about the future of all of these things, because you said, basically, if we do nothing, it's going to get warmer, and a lot of this is going to happen anyways. So even if we stop, which we didn't in 2013, and we're not going to stop this year or next year, things are going to get worse. So is those three mechanisms that you described enough? Do we have to start thinking about carbon capture or some other? I've heard about soil sequestration and other things to try to bring the number down, because it looks like it's running away from everything that you showed me.
So the answer is, things we do today won't affect the decision maker of today, but they do have a profound effect on what happens down the road. It just takes time for that to play out. So anything we do today does have some good, but maybe not in my lifetime, but certainly down the road. But you're right. But one of the reasons why I would say that carbon pricing is the single most important thing to do. Right now, I can name a number of technologies out there. Carbon engineering is one. BC-based company came out of the University of Calgary. Some of you might know David Keith, who's now at Harvard. Developed really fascinating technology that's able to draw carbon from the atmosphere through a catalytic reaction, of which I forgot, can create fuel, like basically gasoline on this side. So essentially it takes atmospheric carbon and creates gas from your car. Now, that's not viable at today's price of carbon. If there was a price of carbon at about $100 a ton, $150 a ton, that becomes economically viable. So then you can start to produce gasoline from atmospheric carbon. There's a bunch of things like that, which is why we're simply not, we're using the atmosphere as an unregulated trash can that we can put anything we want in. So this is the reason why the single most important thing we can do is price emissions. Whether you be Nordhaus or Stern or any of these Nobel Prize type winning economists, you come down to the fact that until we price emissions, until we create them, fix the tragedy problems, we won't grapple on it to deal with this problem. And ultimately, it's much more complex than that too, because right now, if Canada were to aggressively put emissions on its bounds in our jurisdiction, because of various trade deals that we've signed, we cannot put put tariffs on our borders to those jurisdictions who go rogue and don't do anything. Example, New Zealand. Let's suppose New Zealand don't have carbon pricing and BC does. BC has aggressive carbon pricing. Now our apples in the spring are expensive because we picked them in the fall. We kept them cool using natural gas refrigeration to keep them to the spring. But now New Zealand says, oh, this is our picking season. We can dump our apples on your market below your cost because you're paying for that cooling. Canada's response would be, oh no, that's not fair. We'll put a tariff on you coming in. New Zealand then go to the WTO and complain we're putting in anti-dumping tariffs and then complain against Canada in that way. This is the single biggest problem in international negotiations, is there's a bunch of people negotiating, and the people who need to be in the room are not. That's the WTO. We will not get that international negotiations in place unless the WTO is in there and we actually get these trade agreements to allow for punitive carbon tariffs on borders of incoming imports in order to ensure that everybody is actually dealing with this issue. But we will have to deal with this problem. Because the end point is we're not here. And I think that end point is not one we're willing to accept. Again, I come back to the history of human society on this planet. It's littered with civilizations that have grown and collapsed for a variety of reasons. We're on that same pathway. We may be smarter, but we're no smarter than the phytoplankton that goes through this boom and bust collapse every spring in the North Pacific. You would hope we're smarter, but we're doing exactly the same thing.
I think it was the previous slide, the one where you show the summer months. Why is it always the summer months? Why is it always those three? I want to assume that during the rest of the year this would be the same, but why don't we show like a yearly trend?
So this was done by a fellow called Jim Hansen, who's a former director of NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in the US. I don't know the rationale for him doing it. You could do this in any season, and I'm sure someone has. Great master's project, do his analysis on other seasons. But the reason why he would have done it in the summer is because of, number one, that more people in the northern hemisphere, right? So and summer, our summer is affecting more people, and summer is when you get mortality from heat deaths, and you get more of them in the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere because there's more land and more people in the north. I suspect that's the only reason why I think that he did just summer, is that it can then tie directly into the events that we know that happen in Russia, in Canada, in the US, etc., in the summer when the heat manifests itself on treatments. There's no other reason as far as I know. Because you can do the same thing in any season, and you can do it longer, you can do it annually, you can do it with different averaging periods. You get similar results. I would convince you.
Hello. Just wanted to thank you. I'm just curious to ask a political question, maybe not to get you going too much. But do you see a way forward for all the parties to kind of come together and focus on something that we might all have in common, like an old-fashioned political compromise, that we can make this all relevant? I know you said, what was it? Intergenerational equity. Yeah, that sounds like a big word. Maybe hard to remember, but they always said think of the children in the past, maybe something like that. Think of your children's children. Is there a way to maybe come up with a unifying slogan, maybe a way to get all the parties involved, like a total collaboration, not just conservatives, not just liberals, but everyone?
I know exactly where you're going with this, and the answer is yes, I would hope. So to give you some back, what I've noticed in the legislature is there are politicians for which this is a career path. Frankly, I think as a society we should say enough is enough. I've introduced legislation to bring term limits. What happens if you're there for a long time is you start to get cynical and it becomes a bit of a game. Everything you do is about gaming the other party. You see this vicious partisanship. And often new people go into the legislature, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and become jaded and cynical if they're there too long because they're exposed to this kind of toxic environment. With that said, if you believe, as I do, that this is a very serious global issue, that we should be treating it much like we treated things like what are we going to do in terms of wartime Europe? What are we going to do in terms of dealing with SARS epidemic? Where actually we did have, for example, historically, war measures cabinets. It sounds draconian, but I actually don't believe that we should have because this is such a big issue, we should have our executive councils in provincial and federal government made up of all parties, not just as we've evolved in recent history to only the governing party. Because we exclude voices from the table if we do that. And these issues, like global warming, like a SARS epidemic, which was referred to as before, I should say, non-epidemic or pandemic. These issues are not partisan. And frankly, the public wants the political leaders to work together. So we try that. It's very tough because, again, it's tough because I come from an evidence-based decision-making background as a scientist, and I go and walk into an ideological world of decision-based evidence-making where people have been elected by certain stakeholder groups that they're now paying back with favors. And that kind of stuff, I don't find that very acceptable. So it is really tough, but one would hope, we've seen some of that in BC where in the development of Clean BC, our climate plan for British Columbia, it was the Green and the NDP working together to do that. It's our plan, but we work with the NDP. They get a lot of credit, and they deserve a lot of credit for being willing to work together with our caucus to do this. So it is possible, but it's not the norm. It's unusual right now. So I would hope for it. But that's what's good about minority governments. And honestly, and that's one of the reasons we had a referendum of proportional representation. It failed in BC, but when we look about jurisdictions internationally that have really stepped up to the plate, it's often jurisdictions that are governed through a form of proportional representation, whereby you're forced to work with people, you're forced to focus on the things you agree on, as opposed to that which you disagree on. And I actually think that's what it is.
I suggest we do 2 more questions because our students are waiting for the awards. We have one there and another one there.
Hello. So there was a slide where you showed your campaign logo. And I have a question, depending on your answer, I have a follow-up question.
This one here?
Yeah, the previous one.
That was my campaign.
Is the style of the letter V, does that have any significance beyond the stylistic choice?
So this was just lifted off a slide from this technical, yes.
Okay, fine. So, given all of the solutions that I know of, besides some magical technology that will fix all of this, require personal sacrifice on everybody's part. And this is a really tough sell, given that at least 50% of people in the United States, I don't think that much of Canada, don't even believe that man-made climate change is real. So given that, doesn't it seem especially important to keep trying different ways to educate people on the severity of the problem before any political progress can be made?
So the answer to that's a good question. So I would suggest the answer is no. And the reason why is I didn't do the whole history, but the scientific community would say the same thing for decades. Decades. And people aren't listening. People are now beginning to see a few extreme events and trying to play and seeing a little more. But the problem is that we don't have time either. Like if we wait another 10 years, we have an international agreement to keep warming below 2 degrees, right? That's an international agreement. Well, the world's already warmed by 1.1 degrees, and we know if we do no more than keep existing levels of greenhouse gases fixed at present values, we'll get warmed by another 0.6 degrees, and we can have that at 0.1 to 0.2 degrees from the permafrost carbon feedback. So we know the world's going to warm between 1.8 and 1.9 degrees, regardless of what we do. So we can't really wait and hope that we're going to, educate people and then do something, because then it will go 2 degrees. And frankly, we're on path to 4 degrees this century. And frankly, you seem a bit younger, that would be not a very pleasant place to be in a 4-degree warm world. I don't even know where to begin. All of them, every coral reef in the world is dead. Every one. There are no coral reefs left. So that is a collapse of marine species. We know that there will be desertification of southern Europe ongoing now. So what are you going to do with those people? These are profound problems that will affect your generation very seriously. And it doesn't affect me though. I could just say, I'm done. I'm going to go enjoy my UBEC salary at a 50% increase for this job.
Okay, but the question is, how will you get elected by people who you're asking to sacrifice without them knowing? So
I'm living proof that you can. I'm living proof that people want honesty, they want truth, they want integrity, and they want you to tell them rather than tell them what you need to hear, people want to be respectful and to be heard and to be listened and acknowledged to. And I think that you're seeing that. Prince Edward Island just elected 8 Green, a lot of them. We have a minority government in New Brunswick. Who knows what's going to happen? Well, look at what happened in European elections. Germany now has gone green. Green's just a symptom of kind of a populist approach to desire to deal with this problem. But I would disagree with you that in every case it's always about sacrifice. Most people here, how many people here have an electric car? Okay, so there's 3 of us, 4 of us. Now, the 3 of us will probably, if you asked us, say, that's not a sacrifice. It's the smartest decision I ever made. I thought it was a sacrifice at the time, but then I got one, and I realized I was crazy for not having one for all these years, because I don't have to do an oil filter anymore. I have a 2015 Leaf. I have spent exactly 0 on maintenance, 0, apart from windshield wiper fluid. The reason why is there's no moving parts. So it was very clear to me that there was, by making a difference, it actually was positive for my pocketbook, despite the fact I didn't know it would be. So a lot of it is fear. If people actually got beyond the fear and say, okay, I'm gonna take a risk here. The most important thing an individual can do, 40% of emissions in BC from a household emissions are transportation. The most important thing an individual in BC can do is get an electric vehicle. Get $10,000, 5 from the province, 5 from the feds to do it. And as soon as you drive off that lot, you will question why you didn't do that 5 years earlier. And I'm willing to bet anybody here that they would, because of the fact they're fun to drive, they're high-tech, they're cheaper to run, and they're quiet. So there are things like that. There's things, there are many things like that. Many things that we call them no regrets policies. But you're right, there are others that will have some pain, which is why governments need to show the leadership by pricing emissions to ensure that that pain is distributed. And then you can protect those who are most vulnerable as you bring in the money from, say, a carbon tax. You can give it back through a dividend. So actually then you basically take it from the people who are polluting and give it back in a kind of GST rebate fashion to ensure that those who can least afford it are protected. So there are ways that government can deal with this. It's not one policy, it's like a bunch of knobs, buttons, and switches, and it's about working carefully with all of them. So yeah, I'm answered.
That's it. I really hate to cut this discussion short because it's so inspiring, but I would like to thank you again very, very, very much. The 2013 provincial election in Oak Bay, Gordon-Head, Dr. Weaver became the first Green Party member of the Legislative Assembly in British Columbia's history. Since December 2015, he has served as leader of the BC Green Party, and in 2017 he was elected to a second term as MLA in Oak Bay, Gordon-Head. He leads the BC Green Caucus as leader of the third party in the BC legislature. Prior to his election, Dr. Weaver served as a Canada Research Chair in climate modeling and analysis in the School of Earth and Ocean Sciences at the University of Victoria. He was a lead author of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th scientific assessment. It's a great pleasure to have him talk about global warming, a question of priorities. Thank you.
It is a great honor to be here. Does the microphone work well at the back? Yeah, it's good. Thumbs up. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about a journey that I made from physics and maths into the political realm. And I'll start off by saying, and quoting it, the quote's attributed to Henry Kissinger, but it's not actually it's someone else. Those of you, and it's a common question I got, is what difference between the from university to he said, in the university is incredibly vicious because the stakes are so low. The transition has been relatively easy, but in the university system, you're dealing with passive against the politics with very brilliant people. Whereas in the legislative system, it's very aggressive. You know exactly what you said politics. Anyway, so I'll talk a little bit about the journey and in particular the issue that I spent the issue of global warming, and you'll see why I ended up in where I did. So I'm wearing two hats here. One is as a professor in the School of Earth and Ocean Sciences. And sadly, I gave up a Canada Research Chair and another named professorship to enter in the political arena, where I'm now serving as the leader of the BC Green Party at Gordon-Head. To start, I just wanted to give you a sense of the type of research that I did, so you know where I'm coming from. My lab at UVic spent a good deal of time developing something known as the Earth System Survival Model. And in fact, at the University of SFU here, you have an extremely highly regarded scientist named Kirsten Ziegfeld, is she here by chance? Who's uses this locally. She was instrumental in some of the carbon cycle components of this development of this model. So this model is basically takes the inverse approach of what happened in numerical weather prediction. In numerical weather prediction, we can assume that the timescales that are relevant to weather prediction are days. So we can think of the ocean as essentially inert by fixed layer or sea surface temperature specified boundary conditions. Whereas on longer time scales, the inverse approach we took was, okay, on long time scales, we don't care about weather. We care about statistics of weather, but not actually individual weather events. But we do care about some of the longer time scales inherent in the climate system associated with things like the climate cycle and ocean circulation. So the model we built over the last 15 years or so, it's kind of halted its development in the last 5 years, Started from a very complex state-of-the-art ocean general circulation model into which inorganic and organic carbon cycle and marine sediment models were coupled. On top of that, a state-of-the-art sea ice model, and on top of that was a relatively simple energy moisture balance atmosphere model with certain feedbacks in it that would allow us to capture some surface dynamic feedbacks. The land surface was state-of-the-art, as was the vegetation component of that, so trees can grow and move, different types of vegetation exist. And we use this laboratory, I call it a laboratory, to ask what-if questions. To give you an example of that, here's a couple of what-if questions we looked at shortly before I got elected. And these are what-if questions with respect to something that's very important in the issue of climate science, something known as a permafrost carbon feedback. And I'll just illustrate that with one graph here. The what-if is this. Let's suppose, and I'm going to face again, because this is twice in a week that I've talked to audiences that actually have some calculus background. And I know I can put a slide out here, and I don't have to explain what these numbers mean, right? You know what a graph is, it's really refreshing. So I'm using all of these. What is shown here is atmospheric carbon dioxide levels from the year 2000 up to the year 2300, using the model, under the assumption that at the year 2013, magically all emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere are turned off. Just switch it off. What if it happened? And ask the question, what happens to atmospheric carbon dioxide levels as we move forward? Now this model, this persistent climate model, is such that we can make parameterizations, and one of the things we can do is force the climate sensitivity, which is by definition the amount the world warms by doubling carbon dioxide levels. We can force the climate sensitivity to be some number here, 2 degrees, 3 or 4.5, and you'll see why shortly. What this is showing is that in this coupled climate model, if we turn off all emissions at 2013, and the climate sensitivity is 2 degrees, that means that for doubling the atmospheric carbon dioxide, the world warms by 2 degrees. Then we see that if we turn off the emissions at 2013, the atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide drop. If climate sensitivity is 3 degrees, they remain fixed at about the levels that they were at when we turned off the emissions. And if climate sensitivity is above 3 degrees, even if we turn off all anthropogenic and human emissions to the atmosphere, immediately in 2013, levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide continue to increase by about 10% over the coming century. Now, why that's important is it's showing that the positive feedback nature of something known as permafrost carbon feedback. We know that if the climate system has a high climate sensitivity, then permafrost carbon feedback is self-sustaining, meaning even if we turn off emissions, the fact that we've got warming inherent in the system means that we're going to continue to have the thawing, the deepening of the active layer, the exposure of that organic material to oxygen, either directly or in anoxic conditions, it will produce methane. And we know that we're going to get an increasing positive feedback, or an increasing greenhouse gas level associated with positive feedback. This is the kind of questions we could ask with this model. We ask lots of questions like this. And essentially, this is quite troubling, would suggest that if the climate sensitivity, and that's well within estimates, is greater than 3 degrees, then we actually have the permafrost carbon feedback as a self-sustaining positive feedback that most climate models, in fact, I would say all climate models, apart from this one, have actually not explored, because the terrestrial carbon has not been used in its full suite of potential feedbacks in most of the climate projections we hear about. So that's the science. My background is actually, to see where I come from, my background is in physics and maths. I graduated from Oak Bay High School in 1979. Oak Bay is in Victoria. And what's interesting about that is I probably would not have known that grad class that some of whom climbed up on the BC legislature in 1979, that might actually have a premonition of some of those people might actually end up in that place in the years. But why I put this up is it's really important for me, and it's also, I know that there's grad students in the crowd, and I think it's important for them too to realize this is, we are who we are because of the people that we interact with in our journey to come to where we are today. For me, the single most important person influencing my trajectory was my English teacher in high school. His name was Norman Welch. And ultimately, I'm going to list a few people because it's really important that we not forget about why we are here today. Often people think we're here today because we're so smart and it's all because of us. No, it's not. We're here today because of a series of fortunate circumstances, of people along the way who helped us and nurtured us, And often we ignore them, we don't thank them, and I think we should, and I'm going to do that today. Norman Welsh, why he was so instrumental to me, was the first person who actually realized that I could write. I got C's in English all the way through. My handwriting was atrocious. My spelling was even worse. And this was the first person who actually looked beyond that and said, you know what, there's something there. He encouraged me to write. And I'll never forget that, and I'll thank him to this day because of that. I spent most of my life writing, and that was a pivotal moment. When I graduated from high school, I like the sciences, I bumbled my way through, like many people do when they graduate from high school. I ended up going to do physics and maths at Edinburgh University, and then I graduated in physics and maths at University of Victoria, playing rugby all the way, as I'll point out. That's important. I'll come back to the rugby part, because it's important. I started off in the field of particle physics. I was, Big Bang Theory was not a thing back there, but I felt very comfortable watching that now, because that was me. In 83, 84, I went down for a year. I did play some more rugby there. Again, doing physics and maths. And what came to, playing rugby. And then I had a rugby injury, pretty bad one. I had to come back and get Operation Canada. Finished my PhD at UBC again, and I did resume rugby again. It was in applied maths again. And then I went to Australia, where you'll see I'm walking gimpy because I had another injury, and I never played rugby again after that. But why I went to those is that I was always interested in physics and maths. But I also liked playing rugby and hanging out with my friends who were not typically physics and maths people. And I wanted to work in an area of physics and maths that I felt was relevant to everyday people, relevant to the daily life that we have. I still, I was listening to some of the particle physics talks. I still admire profoundly that field. In fact, my first conference I went to was a Canadian undergraduate physics conference where we presented on the DAISY experiment in, it was the Argus experiment. Argo experiment at DAISY, I think it was. Is that right? I got that right? Argus experiment at DAISY. It was just getting going back in 1982. And a number of summer students and Jim Prentice was there, Bob Orr was there. Well, Jim's not passed away, but were there. And I remember it was a good time to be in the field of physics. But all through my journey again, the people who have inspired me have been my professors. I was trained by a lot of men. Obviously, we're more diverse these days, but Morris Mysak, some of you may know from the University of BC, was instrumental in actually making science fun. And to me, that's critical, is that we have to enjoy what we do. And if we don't enjoy what we do, we have to ask why we're doing it. He brought that sense of joy to me in terms of dealing with science. And Jason Middleton, who's an applied mathematician at the University of New South Wales in Australia, where I did a postdoc, was instrumental in letting me, teaching me about the importance of work-life balance. I did not have such a good work-life balance. It was a lot of work, and then the balance was playing rugby, and that's not necessarily a good balance. And finally, Ed Sarachek, who was my postdoctoral advisor at the University of Washington. I had gone to a system whereby I was encouraged to publish. And you publish a lot of papers, but if people don't care about them, what's the point? Ed was quite instrumental in actually saying, stop publishing that nonsense. You want to focus on problems that are important. Why don't you look at these problems? And it made me, an important lesson that I took from him is that you can publish 10 papers that nobody cares about, or one paper that is important. And you're far better off with that one paper that's important, dealing with important issues. And then finally I became a professor at UVic, McGill first, and then UVic. And that's where I am here. But all along this, I've always believed, and I truly believe it's for all academic researchers at universities, that this should hold, is that science communication is absolutely critical for us. Critical more so today than ever before with the onset of the internet, where anybody can go anywhere in the world and provide an opinion to justify their pre-existing opinion and therefore validate their own belief system. I also believe fundamentally that science that is ineffectively communicated is ineffective science. You can find the greatest discovery in the world in your basement, but if you don't know how to tell people about it, it's entirely useless. And so I think we have a responsibility. I always have, always believed that since we're funded largely by public money, we have a responsibility to communicate the results of what we do. Not by holding press conferences and then saying, I've discovered cold fusion. No, it's about actually responding when asked, when the communications departments at universities ask, when the media asks. We owe it to give back. And again, I can't underestimate how important that is, because the only reason why you get funded, science funded, is because it makes it into budgets that are governed by parties, and those parties have MLAs, and those MLAs or MPs respond to people who email and contact them. And if we're not talking about our science, it's one of the first things to go. When people are complaining about hip and knee replacement, you bet the money's going to get reelected and to fund hip and knee replacement plans. When we're sitting in our basement and saying, I don't have to communicate my science because it's all in goodwill, just fund what I do, it's not good enough. That's not good enough for today's society. And I believe that we actually it behooves us to actually take this very seriously. Because effective science communication, I would argue, is absolutely critical if we want to have continued ongoing public support for science. And we're in very troubling times where we're in an era of decision-based evidence making. And most of us here of evidence-based decision. As scientists, you know, the person with the best data, with the model that can explain the best data, is the person who wins the discussion. That's not what happens in politics. It's not what happens in laws. It's the person with the most compelling argument, or compelling ideological position that they can assert in a loud, boisterous voice. It's very troubling, and you see it in the U.S., but it's equally true here in British Columbia as it is in Canada. That we have people standing up and saying, we must do this in the name of science. But I will admit that not everyone is as enthusiastic about science communication as perhaps I am, and you know, it does have its negative consequences. I have a wall of hatred on my wall at UVic, and there's just a few snippets to give you a sense here. You know, if you've read the news, I get this all the time, but this is particularly fun. There's no global warming perspective. It's about money, and that's all, just like everything else, it's all only about money. As long as you can scare people into believing you're fraudulent global warming, you've got lots and lots of money. See jerks who know it's stupid, retards. Well, it's remarkable, actually, because, you know, that, again, logic is not typically an attribute for some of the global warming skeptics. The logic behind this makes no sense, of course, because if the climate science community are the loudest speakers of one of the most outspoken people about the importance of dealing with this. And when we're saying we don't need more science to actually tell us what the problem is and what the solutions are, it's kind of inconsistent to argue we need more science to study a problem. So in fact, the argument here, if we really wanted more research grants, was we should stand up and say, uncertainties are still big, we need to continue to reduce uncertainties, give me more money. It doesn't work like that. This is my favorite, one of my favorites, radio host, suggested that I was a flatulent demagogue. It was hysterical. I didn't know what demagogue meant. I had to look that up. Hysterical fear-mongering shouldn't be featured, but investigated. After all, he receives grants to do his, quote, research, quote. I mean, you're looking at this and looking at grants to do it. Yeah, all of you get grants to do your research. But we assume that people out there in the general public understand what a grant is. I'll tell you right now, most people think that when you get a research grant, you're paying yourself a salary. They don't understand that that research grant is essentially to do nothing more than to support a graduate student or to send a graduate student to a conference, or heaven forbid, publish a paper in an Elsevier journal, or not Elsevier, or a societal journal where you have to pay $100 a page charge. And then, in the issue of climate change, we also entered into the realm of religious belief systems. And I mean this with the greatest respect, because it's important to recognize in science, when we communicate our science, that we cannot change some various people's belief systems. This is an extreme example of a person who believes I literally am the Antichrist, and that in talking about global warming, I will change people's behavior. And what will then end up happening is that God's will, which is Earth's with the environmental degradation and passage towards the rapture, will not happen, and that is wrong. And so this is an extreme example, but it is something that is far more prevalent than we might believe, because we spend our time in our labs, and we may not realize that a significant fraction of Americans believe, as a matter of faith, that global warming is not a problem, because it's God's will, and it's God's will to take us to Armageddon, the second coming of the rapture. And again, you may agree or disagree with that. As somebody communicating science, you cannot belittle that view. You must, because that view will turn somebody who's open to listening to you into somebody who will defend their ideological belief system, regardless of what you have to say. And so we have to understand that people come from different perspectives. Here's this fellow. Still waiting for global warming to be disgusting and lying, greedy scientists with an evil heart of unbelief. Greedy scientists with an evil heart of unbelief are going to God's spiritual principle, Hades under the ocean, belly of earth, and your will, intellect, and emotions and conscience for 1,000 years of torment. Christopher Hitchens is there now, and he knows there is a God now. He's waiting for you and David Suzuki, which is David Suzuki. Together with Darwin, God abhors liars, the meek shall inherit the earth. You know, God hates the united abominations, Agenda 21, blah, blah, blah. And this one particular guy took it upon himself to placard and picket my institution for quite some number of years. He stopped now, but he was calling me a practicing liar. I'm glad I was just practicing. That's anyway, so I'm still, despite the silliness, I would like to emphasize the importance of science communication, particularly in today's age, where there's an anti-science, a kind of, look at the rise of measles outbreak. Pure response to people not vaccinated because of an anti-vaccine. Look at the nonsense with respect to autism and vaccination. There was no papers published on autism and vaccination, but it's led to outrageous anti-science beliefs, and we do bear a certain amount of responsibility for not communicating that in the broader public. To the issue of climate science, and to the issue of what got me into politics. So many people think that global warming is somehow a new phenomenon. Every single person in this room will know about Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier, a French mathematician, very well known for some of his early work in fluid mechanics, the Fourier series, Fourier transforms, etc. But what people may not realize is he was actually the very first scientist to recognize that the atmosphere, this is French, I think I translated it in English too, that the atmosphere was such that it was essentially transparent to incoming solar radiation, but was effective at blocking outgoing long-wave radiation and re-radiating that stuff back to the Earth, to act in essence like a blanket, to allow life to flourish and keep the surface of the Earth warmer than it would otherwise be in the absence of an atmosphere. Remarkable, going back to 1824. 1861, John Tyndall, another well-known fluid analyst from the UK, also well known for his outrageous sideburns, but he also developed an incredible instrument back in the 1850s, early 60s. And this instrument was able to detect and measure the different absorptive properties of a variety of greenhouse gases, like water vapor, carbon dioxide, and others. And he was able to assert that certain greenhouse gases are more effective at blocking long wave than others. In 1896, Svan Arrhenius, known for some obscure work he did in chemistry, for which he got a Nobel Prize, he also was the first to calculate something known as climate sensitivity. I talked about that earlier. By definition, climate sensitivity is the globally average surface air temperature warming for a doubling of carbon dioxide levels from pre-industrial to times, from 280 to 560 parts per million. Very first estimates in 1896, 120-something years ago. And his estimate was that climate sensitivity was something like 5 to 6 degrees. It was wrong, but it was the first estimate. In 1936, Guy Callendar was the first scientist to make multi-century projections as to what would happen as a direct consequence of industrial activity and increasing carbon dioxide levels. He made an assumption that he knew what the 1936 emissions rates were, made an assumption that they remained invariant in perpetuity, so the rate of emissions was unchanged, and subsequently calculated future increases of what the atmospheric carbon dioxide level would look like in the year 2000, 2100, 2200, etc. And he further calculated that the resulting warming would be something like 0.4 degrees for an atmosphere around 330 parts per million and 0.6 for 360. These were remarkable calculations that have stood the test of time, but obviously what didn't was his assumption that emissions have not grown since 1936 values, and we're already at 410 parts per million and climbing at about 2 to 3 per year. Now we come to the year I graduated from high school, 1979. Jules Charney, MIT prof, was tasked with developing the first national assessment of our collective understanding of what would happen as a direct consequence of human activity increasing the loading of greenhouse gases. In particular, he assembled a team under the auspices of the National Academy of Sciences to write an expert report in this area. And this is what they came up with. In 1979, the very best estimate of climate sensitivity, that is how much the world would warm as a direct consequence of doubling atmospheric carbon dioxide, was somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees with a central estimate of 3. 1979, I'm 17 years old, graduating from high school in that year. Recall that Arrhenius made the calculation of 5 to 6. It's incorrect, but still way ahead of his time. The very first coupled atmosphere ocean model was in 1975, and that single number that came from there was 2.9. So now let's move fast forward to 1990. So under the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which reports to the World Climate Research Program, the World Meteorological Organization. This is a United Nations body whereby every 5-6 years it's tasked with assessing our collective understanding of the science of climate change and reporting out on that. In 1990, the very first assessment was done. Several hundred scientists from around the world. I was a brand new faculty member at McGill at the time. Climate sensitivity, as assessed by the international expert community in 1990, was somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees. 1995 was the second IPC assessment. Now I was just moved to UPenn. I was now an associate professor. I published a fair number of papers in this area. I was involved in this chapter. And our collective assessment was the best estimate of climate sensitivity is somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees. In 2001, I was involved in this one as well. This third assessment report, the best estimate of climate sensitivity was 1.5 to 4.5 degrees. Let's go to 2007. I was on this chapter as well. Best estimate of climate sensitivity was somewhere between 2 and 4.5 degrees with a central estimate of 3. And then we come to 2013, and hold on to your chairs here. In 2013, lo and behold, we were a little exuberant in 2007. New probabilistic approaches have been done, and in fact, we should go back to 1.5 to 4.5 degrees. So there, 35 years basically, from Charney's report. The single most important metric describing our collective understanding of the climate problem has basically been unchanged. That is, if we double warming, it's going to be somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees, based on the various climate feedbacks that are around. Now, there are literally tens of thousands of papers published in the field, and you can just check that out on Web of Science, type in global warming and climate change, and you'll see something to 75,000 papers that have been published in this field. And you can bet a lot of people have been trying to knock this down, and you can bet that we've learned more and more about many aspects of this problem. We know more and more about the same problem, and in essence, this 2013 report, which I was part of in that chapter again, could be summarized as this: more of the same with greater certainty. So you can imagine as somebody who got into this field in the PhD in 85, started publishing in the area in 89, in 2007, 2012, the last thing in the world I could bring myself to do was write another paper on the topic of climate change, knowing that really we don't need more science on this problem. There's lots of things we can do around that to learn this and that. There's lots of good questions still to be solved. But the big picture, we know what the problem is, and we know how to deal with it. But what's the problem? The world is warming. And now you would think that that's obvious. But I tell you that more than 40% of Republicans in the U.S. do not believe that there is strong evidence that the world is actually warm. That's akin to not believing in the existence of the thermometer. So that's the kind of thing we're up against. We know the climate system is warm. This is the NOAA report. There's a number of organizations that put together. NOAA in the U.S. We know that the warmest year on record was 2016. We know that the second warmest was 2015, 2017. We know that we can explain this trend very well using anthropogenic greenhouse gases and aerosols, volcanic emissions, and so forth. And we know that we can reproduce the slow movement of this trend very well using the climate models. We know we can backcast and forecast and hindcast. We've tested them ad nauseum, and we know how this is going to manifest itself. And that's beautifully illustrated by this messy plot. And as we all know from physics, the messier the plot, the more interesting it is. And why this is interesting is it's showing a unique way of actually, and it's showing part of the problem with why people don't get what's going on. What's shown here in the top is 1955, in the middle top is 65, at the top right is 75. These are summer surface temperature anomalies relative to an average over 3 decades from 50 to 1980, and it's being detrended as well. And so what's being plotted here is essentially standard deviations. So that what we're plotting here is in 1965, in 1955, this red here means that the temperature in the summer, average over the months of the summer in 1955, was more than 2 standard deviations above the normal, where the normal is defined in the periods 1951 to 1980. So 1955, 65, 75, you would expect from pure chance that about 5% of the globe would be covered by warming of more than 2 standard deviations, just by pure chance. And we would expect about 32% of the globe covered just by pure chance, by warming 1 standard deviation above and 1 standard deviation below. You'd expect about 0.27% by pure chance to have standard deviation and so forth. Now, what's interesting is when you look at 55, 65, and 75, you basically get these percentages playing out. There's a lot of blue, there's a lot of red, there's some deep red and some dark purple, meaning there's some, as you would expect, a pure chance. But then when we look at 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 10, 11, it continues, but the paper was published in 2012, it's still valid today. What you find is that greater and greater areas of the globe are covered by greater and greater warming periods, such that, in fact, 5% of the globe in 2006, 5% in 2007, 4% in 2008, 6% in 2009, 13% in 2010, 8% in 2011, are greater than 3 standard deviations above normal. We'd expect about 0.25%. Now we're getting between 4 and 13% of the world in any given summer, more than 3 standard deviations above normal warming. But it's not happening the same place every year. So while you might find that in 2010 was a big problems in Russia. All right, yeah, so here it is. 2010, Russia went through massive heat waves. You can imagine they're very concerned about global warming here. But if you're down in the southern Argentina, it's colder than normal. You go to India one year, it's colder than normal and warmer the next. And so if you're stationary in time, thank you. There's Russia, it's 3 to 5 standard deviations above normal. If we go to India, it's kind of a little bit above normal this year, and then the next year it's below normal. And so the problem here is that we are all experts in climate science because, well, it's just like if there's teachers or if anyone's got a spouse who's a teacher here, you'll know they'll come home from work and they'll be very frustrated because they have to deal with parents, and because every parent has gone to school, every parent acts like they're an expert in education. It's the same thing with the climate system. Everybody experiences weather. Everyone's an expert on the physics of climate system. And it can be very frustrating. We know, again, that the world is going to get wetter at high latitudes and drier at low latitudes. We know it's going to come in increasingly extreme events. We know it's going to be skewed toward rain instead of snow in the winter. We know we're going to get increased likelihood of summer drought. This has just been well known for quite some time. We know, for example, that the increased area burnt of forest fires in Canada is a direct consequence of human activity through loading of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the creation of summer conditions that are drier than normal and warmer than normal, and we have no shortage of ignition and no shortage of fuel. So we've known that for a decade or so. But what we overlook and why we have this political problem dealing with it is summarized in this figure here. And in fact, this figure is, I would argue, the most important figure that published in the field of climate science I would go as far as say, the history of climate science. It's coming from the 2007 IPCC report. It's old, but it's very illustrative. What it shows is 2 columns, 3 rows. The top row is B1, the next is A1B, third is A2. The first column is average annual mean temperatures over the years 2020 to 2029, a decadal average of annual mean summer temperature anomalies relative to the 1980 to 1990 mean. And this is the same thing, but at the end of the century. B1 means we have to make some assumptions of future emissions growth. This is relatively benign growth. This was business as usual prior to the industrialization of Asia and India. And this is the pathway we're on. Now, why this figure is so important is and the numbers itself don't matter. What matters is the general patterns, is that if you look carefully at the first column, it's very difficult to discern any differences between these 3 patterns. That is, there's about 0.2 degrees per decade warming in store, regardless of the emissions trajectory, whether it's benign growth or not, essentially translating into, regardless of the decisions we make today, in the next couple of decades, the warming is going to happen the way it's going to happen. And the reason why, of course, is because of socioeconomic inertia in the built infrastructure. We don't build a coal plant today to tear it down tomorrow. We build a coal plant today in the last 50 years. But why this is also important is if we look at the end of the century, we have 2 dramatically different worlds. One about 2 degrees warmer and one about 4 degrees warmer. And that, in essence, this figure boils the entire question of global warming down to one question. Do we, the present generation, owe anything to future generations in terms of the quality of environment that we leave behind? In particular, global warming is nothing more than a question of intergenerational equity. If we do not believe in the importance of intergenerational equity, then who cares about this problem? Who cares about this problem? It's irrelevant. But if we do, then what it means is that we must act today. And therein lies the political conundrum. Most politicians, I can assure you, are very concerned about re-election. Most politicians are thinking about doing things in their 4-year term that they can point to and say, vote me back in because I've listened to you, I've responded, I deserve another chance. It can be replacement finance. You'll hear people campaigning on it every campaign. We're going to reduce that because they know 70 to 80% of seniors vote. Only 30 to 40% of youth vote. For 70 to 80% of seniors, if they're living with arthritic pain in a joint, you can make a real difference in someone's life by increasing or reducing wait line times for knee replacements. If I'm going to put in aggressive carbon pricing or a very aggressive zero-emission vehicle standard, it's a little more difficult to actually see the fruits of your efforts. And frankly, they will have no effect on the climate system in your lifetime. Sorry, in your political lifetime. That is, the decision makers who are making don't have to live the consequences of the decisions they're making. And those that do are not participating in our democratic institutions or are yet to be born. This is a conundrum. It's a problem, which is one of the reasons why Greta Thunberg has been speaking out. It's so powerful, is that she represents a youth voice that is saying enough is enough. And the question to understand why we must act today as opposed to wait is that the analogy of the pot of water on the stove is so simple and so direct, yet so applicable.